In the vast expanse of the Galactic Defense Academy, where the universe's most elite warriors gathered to learn the art of interstellar combat, one species was consistently underestimated: humans. Those strange, soft creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable star system were often the subject of quiet mockery among their alien peers. Their bodies seemed fragile, their technology primitive, and their tactics, well, according to Instructor Vexthai of the prestigious Cepharian Military Command, their combat methods were nothing short of laughable. But on this particular day, in Lecture Hall Omega 7, something would happen that would forever change how the galaxy viewed human warfare. It would start with a simple question posed by a raised hand belonging to a seemingly ordinary human cadet. What followed would shatter every assumption, every stereotype, and every carefully constructed belief about Earth's children that the galactic community had built over decades. Some lessons are taught from textbooks. Others are learned through blood, sweat, and the cold realization that sometimes the teacher becomes the student. This is the story of the day when humanity reminded the galaxy why they had earned their place among the stars, not through technology or strength, but through something far more dangerous: human ingenuity, adaptability, and the terrifying creativity that emerges when peaceful people are pushed to war. The morning sun of Kepler 442b cast long shadows through the reinforced transparent aluminum windows of the Galactic Defense Academy's main lecture hall. Instructor Vexthai stood at the podium, his 8-foot frame casting an imposing silhouette against the holographic display behind him. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lighting, and his forearms moved with practiced precision as he manipulated the three-dimensional battlefield projections floating in the air. The lecture hall buzzed with the quiet murmur of nearly 300 cadets from across the galaxy. Zephyrians with their insectoid features sat alongside the serpentine Nagari, while the crystalline Veltar hummed in harmonic frequencies that served as their form of whispered conversation. Near the back, almost as an afterthought, sat the human contingent, 23 young men and women who had somehow earned their way into the most prestigious military academy in known space. Vexthai's compound eyes swept across the assembled students, lingering for just a moment on the human section, with what could only be described as barely concealed disdain. In his 47 years of teaching advanced tactical warfare, he had seen countless species rise to become formidable warriors: the Zephyrians, with their natural armor and incredible speed; the Nagari, with their ability to compress their bodies through spaces barely larger than their heads; the mighty Korvan, whose strength could bend durasteel with their bare hands. And then there were the humans. Soft, slow, fragile. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced physical capabilities to speak of. Their technology, while surprisingly advanced for such a young species, still lagged behind most of the galactic community by several centuries. They had been admitted to the Academy more as a diplomatic courtesy than out of any real expectation that they would contribute meaningfully to galactic defense. Today, Vexthai announced, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics, we will be examining the fundamental principles of small unit tactics in hostile environments. The holographic display shifted, showing a barren planetoid pocked with craters and defensive installations. This is Outpost Zeta 9, which fell to hegemony forces during the Proxima conflict 3 cycles ago. The display zoomed in, revealing the intricate details of the defensive positions. Automated turrets, energy barriers, underground bunker networks, all the hallmarks of a fortress designed to withstand conventional assault. Several cadets leaned forward, taking notes on their personal data pads. The hegemony forces numbered approximately 2,000 combat units, Vexthai continued, gesturing with one of his secondary arms while his primary hands worked the hologram controls. The defending force consisted of 57 Corvan heavy infantry, equipped with standard Mark V1 battle armor and plasma weaponry. The battle lasted 14 hours before the outpost fell. A Corvan cadet in the front row, her massive frame barely fitting in the reinforced chair, raised one of her hands. Instructor, what was the tactical error that led to defeat? Vexthai's mandibles clicked approvingly. An excellent question, Cadet Dokmar. The primary error was one of doctrine. The Corvan defenders relied too heavily on their natural advantages, their strength and durability. They attempted to hold fixed positions against overwhelming numbers, trading space for time in a conventional manner. The instructor manipulated the display, showing the hegemony's advance pattern. The attackers used standard suppression tactics, concentrated fire, Flanking maneuvers and overwhelming force applied at decisive points. Against most species, these tactics work adequately. They are predictable, reliable, and minimized losses among attacking forces. A Zephyrian cadet, her wings rustling with interest, spoke up, "What would have been a better defensive strategy?" "Mobility," Vexthai replied immediately. "Hit-and-run tactics, using the terrain to channel enemy movements." The Corvin, however, are psychologically predisposed to stand and fight. It is both their greatest strength and their greatest weakness. His compound eyes swept the room again. Each species brings its own advantages and limitations to the battlefield. The key to effective tactics is understanding these biological and psychological constraints. The instructor paused at a new slide, showing various species in combat situations. The Nagari excel at infiltration and assassination due to their flexible physiology. The Velta can coordinate massive group actions through their telepathic networks. The Zephyrians dominate aerial combat with their natural flight capabilities. He clicked to another slide. And then we have other species. The display now showed a human soldier in basic combat gear. Several chuckles rippled through the alien cadets, and Vexthai made no effort to suppress them. The human section sat in uncomfortable silence, their faces carefully neutral. "Humans," Vexthai said, his voice carrying a note of condescension, "represent perhaps the most interesting case study in military adaptation. They possess no natural weapons, no enhanced physical capabilities, and no innate tactical advantages. Their homeworld is a relatively peaceful garden planet with minimal predator pressure, resulting in a species that is frankly poorly adapted for warfare." Marcus Chen, sitting in the third row of the human section, felt his jaw clench. Beside him, his roommate Sarah O'Brien's knuckles had gone white where she gripped her stylus. But they remained silent. They had learned, over their months at the academy, that responding to such comments only made things worse. Vexthai continued his lecture with evident satisfaction. Human combat doctrine, such as it is, relies heavily on technology and numerical superiority. When forced to fight, they typically employ overwhelming firepower and accept massive casualties to achieve their objectives. This is, one must understand, the natural result of a species that lacks the physical and psychological adaptations for efficient warfare. The instructor brought up a new holographic display showing various historical human conflicts. Their history is replete with examples of inefficient combat. Their so-called world wars saw millions of casualties for relatively minor territorial gains. Their concept of total war demonstrates a fundamental inability to apply force selectively and efficiently. More chuckles from the alien cadets. The Corvin cadet Thokmar turned to look at the human section with what might have been pity on her heavy features. "It is unfortunate," she rumbled in her deep voice, "that some species are simply not suited for the warrior's path." "Indeed," Vexthai agreed. "This is not to say that humans cannot contribute to galactic defense. Their manufacturing capabilities and logistical support have proven valuable. However, when it comes to actual combat operations, their limitations become readily apparent." The instructor changed slides again, this time showing detailed anatomical diagrams. Consider the physical constraints. Human reaction times are significantly slower than most species represented in this room. Their strength-to-weight ratio is poor. They lack natural armor, and their sensory capabilities are limited to a narrow spectrum of electromagnetic radiation and a relatively crude auditory range. Dr. Yiska Redhawk, one of only 2 human instructors at the academy, sat in the faculty observation section, her dark eyes hard as flint. She had heard variations of this lecture too many times over the past year. The Academy's administration claimed that exposing human cadets to these realistic assessments would toughen them and force them to develop alternative strategies. In practice, it felt more like institutional bullying. Vexthai was warming to his theme now, but perhaps the most significant limitation is psychological. Humans, as I mentioned, evolved on a relatively peaceful world. They lack the predator's instinct that drives effective combat behavior. Their pack-bonding tendencies, while useful for unit cohesion, make them emotionally unstable when casualties occur. They exhibit what can only be termed combat trauma at rates far exceeding other species. The instructor gestured dismissively. This emotional fragility further limits their tactical flexibility. They cannot make the hard choices that warfare demands. They become paralyzed by moral considerations that other species naturally overcome. In the human section, Jennifer Martinez felt her face burn with shame and anger. She thought of her grandfather, who had fought in 3 different conflicts before she was born. She thought of the stories he had told her about friends who hadn't come home. The way Vexthai spoke made it sound like caring about your fellow soldiers was a weakness rather than a strength. Now, Vexthai continued, let us return to our case study. Imagine, hypothetically, that the outpost Zeta 9 scenario had been defended by human forces instead of Corvin. How might such a defense have played out? The instructor's question was clearly rhetorical, but several alien cadets eagerly participated in the mental exercise. They would have surrendered immediately, suggested one Zephyrian, causing laughter throughout the hall. Or perhaps tried to negotiate, added a Nagari cadet. Humans seem to prefer talking to fighting. If they did fight, Thokmar rumbled thoughtfully, they would probably try to hide behind their fortifications and call for reinforcements. Very passive. Vexthai nodded approvingly at each suggestion. All excellent observations. Human tactical doctrine tends toward the defensive and reactive. They prefer to let their enemies come to them rather than seizing the initiative. In a scenario like Outpost Zeta 9, they would likely attempt to hold the prepared positions until relief forces arrived. But Instructor, called out a Veltar cadet, its crystalline voice chiming, what if no relief forces were available? An excellent question, Vexthai replied. In such circumstances, human forces would likely, the outcome would be inevitable. Their technology might allow them to hold out longer than the Corvin did, but the end result would be the same, perhaps worse, as human reluctance to take casualties would prevent them from making the tactical sacrifices necessary for an effective defense. The instructor began manipulating the hologram again, showing various attack vectors against the outpost. You see, humans fundamentally misunderstand the nature of warfare. They treat it as a problem to be solved through engineering rather than a contest of will and adaptation. This is why their military history is characterized by costly, protracted conflicts rather than decisive victories. From his position in the back of the human section, Marcus Chen had heard enough. He had listened to months of this kind of commentary, had endured countless subtle and not-so-subtle insults about human capabilities, human courage, human worth. He had watched friends grow quiet and withdrawn, their confidence eroded by constant denigration. He had seen Sarah crying quietly in her bunk, after particularly brutal training exercises where human limitations were put on full display for alien amusement. Marcus had joined the Galactic Defense Academy because he believed in the dream of interstellar cooperation. He had grown up reading about the wonders of galactic civilization, about the incredible diversity of intelligence and capability that the cosmos had produced. He had imagined a future where humanity could stand as equals among the stars, contributing their own unique strengths to the common good. Instead, he had found an institution that seemed designed to remind him and his fellow humans that they were barely tolerated guests in a galaxy that had no real use for them. Slowly, Marcus raised his hand. The gesture was so unexpected that it took several seconds for the hall to notice. Conversations died away as alien heads turned to stare at the human who had dared to interrupt the instructor's lecture. Vexthai's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with obvious irritation. Yes, Cadet Chen? The instructor's voice carried a note of barely contained annoyance. Do you have a question about human tactical limitations? Marcus stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 300 pairs of eyes upon him. His heart was pounding, and he could feel sweat beading on his forehead, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Actually, sir, I was wondering if you might have misunderstood something about human combat doctrine. A ripple of shocked murmurs ran through the hall. Several alien cadets exchanged glances of disbelief. No one contradicted Instructor Vexthai in his own classroom. Certainly no human had ever been so presumptuous. Vexthai's mandibles clicked ominously. I beg your pardon, Cadet. Are you suggesting that my analysis of your species' military capabilities is incorrect? Marcus felt his mouth go dry, but he pressed on. Not incorrect, sir. Incomplete. I think you may have been looking at human warfare through the lens of other species' tactical preferences rather than understanding what human combat doctrine actually represents. The silence in the lecture hall was deafening. Dr. Redhawk sat forward in her seat, her expression unreadable. The other human cadets stared at Marcus with expressions ranging from admiration to horror. Sarah O'Brien had gone completely pale. Vexthai set down his hologram controls and turned to face Marcus fully. All four arms crossed over his thorax in a gesture that indicated either deep contemplation or barely restrained aggression. Very well, Cadet Chen, the instructor said, his voice dangerously quiet. Please, Enlighten us. What profound aspects of human military doctrine have I failed to grasp in my 47 years of studying interstellar warfare? Marcus took a deep breath. In for a penny, he thought, in for a pound. You said that humans treat warfare as a problem to be solved through engineering, rather than a contest of will and adaptation. But I think that's exactly backwards, sir. I think what you're seeing as a weakness is actually the most dangerous thing about human combat doctrine. The young man paused, gathering his thoughts. Around him, the lecture hall waited in stunned silence. Every other species in this room fights the way their biology and evolution programmed them to fight, Marcus continued. Corvins stand and fight because they're big and strong and tough. Zephyrians use speed and flight because that's what their physiology gives them. Nagari infiltrate because they can compress and slip through small spaces. Marcus gestured to the holographic display still showing the outpost Zeta. 9. Scenario. But humans? Humans fight the way the situation requires them to fight, not the way their biology dictates. And that's what makes them dangerous. Vexthai's compound eyes narrowed. Explain. Marcus felt a strange calm settling over him as he found his footing in the argument. You said humans lack natural weapons, natural armor, enhanced physical capabilities. That's true. But what you didn't mention is that this forces humans to become incredibly adaptable. We can't rely on being stronger or faster or tougher, so we have to be smarter, more flexible, more creative. The young man pointed to the hologram. In your Outpost Zeta-9 scenario, you said humans would try to hold the prepared positions defensively, but that's not human doctrine at all. That's what humans might do if they were trying to fight like Corvin. If humans were actually defending that outpost, they would do something that no other species would even consider. And what would that be? Vexthai asked, his tone skeptical but no longer entirely dismissive. Marcus smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several nearby alien cadets shift uncomfortably in their seats. They would cheat. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Several alien cadets made sounds of confusion or disgust. The concept of deliberately breaking the rules of engagement was so foreign to most species that they barely had words for it in their own languages. Vexthai's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his people. Cadet Chen, you seem to be suggesting that humans would resort to dishonorable tactics. Surely you cannot be serious. Marcus shook his head. Not dishonorable, sir. Unconventional. There's a difference. He gestured toward the holographic outpost. You keep talking about human warfare like it follows the same patterns as everyone else's. Fixed positions, conventional tactics, predictable responses. But human military history isn't about following rules. It's about breaking them. Elaborate, Vexthai commanded, though his tone suggested he was beginning to regret asking. Marcus took another breath, feeling the weight of his species' reputation resting on his shoulders. Humans don't fight fair, sir. They fight to win. And when you're smaller and weaker and slower than everything else in the galaxy, fighting fair is how you die. The young human moved slightly, positioning himself where he could address both the instructor and the broader classroom. Take the outpost scenario. You said humans would try to hold prepared positions until relief arrived, but that assumes humans would fight the battle the enemy expects them to fight. Marcus pointed to different sections of the holographic display as he spoke. Human doctrine would start with the assumption that defending the outpost conventionally is impossible. 2,000 attackers against 57 defenders? Those aren't odds you can overcome with superior firepower or better armor. So you don't try. Then what would humans do? Tokma asked, her massive frame leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Surrender? No, Marcus replied, and his smile grew wider. They'd change the rules of the game. The human cadet walked closer to the holographic display, pointing to specific features. First principle of human tactics. If you can't win the battle you're given, fight a different battle instead. In this scenario, humans wouldn't try to defend the outpost. They'd try to make taking the outpost irrelevant. Vexthai's compound eyes tracked Marcus's movements around the hologram. How? Environmental manipulation, Marcus said, his finger tracing along the crater formations around the base. This outpost is built on an asteroid with unstable geology. Humans would probably start by undermining the structural integrity of the entire installation. Plant explosives not to stop the attackers, but to make the terrain itself unusable. A shocked murmur ran through the alien cadets. The Velta cadet who had asked about reinforcements chimed in harmonics that translated roughly to, "But that would destroy the installation they're supposed to defend." "Exactly," Marcus nodded. "Humans wouldn't try to hold ground that can't be held. They'd deny it to the enemy instead. If you can't keep it, make sure nobody else can use it either." Instructor Vaxthai began manipulating the hologram controls, highlighting the geological survey data for the asteroid. The structural damage required to destabilize this formation would require considerable explosive force. The defenders would likely not survive such an action. "Probably not," Marcus agreed calmly, "but the attackers definitely wouldn't. And that's what I mean about human doctrine being different. Other species fight to preserve themselves first, complete the mission second. Humans fight to complete the mission, period." The lecture hall fell into an uncomfortable silence. The concept of deliberately sacrificing oneself to deny victory to an enemy was not foreign to other species, but the casual way Marcus discussed it was unsettling. Dr. Redhawk found herself sitting forward in her chair, watching the exchange with intense interest. She had heard Marcus in class before, but she had never seen him quite like this. There was something in his demeanor, a quiet confidence that reminded her of some of the human military advisors she had worked with before joining the academy. "But surely," interjected a Zephyrian cadet, "such tactics would be considered war crimes under galactic convention?" Marcus turned to look at her and his expression was genuinely puzzled. "War crimes? We're talking about defensive operations against an invading force. What war crimes?" "Destroying civilian infrastructure," the Zephyrian replied immediately. "Disproportionate response. Failure to provide opportunity for surrender." "The outpost is a military installation," Marcus countered. "There are no civilians." The attackers came armed and in overwhelming numbers. They had their chance to not attack in the first place. And disproportionate to what? They brought 40 to 1 odds. I'd say blowing up the whole asteroid is proportional to that. Vexthai's mandibles were clicking continuously now. "Cadet Chen, you speak as though human military doctrine actively disregards the conventional laws of warfare." "No, sir," Marcus replied, but there was steel in his voice now. "Human military doctrine recognizes that the conventional laws of warfare were written by species that had the luxury of being bigger, stronger, and tougher than their enemies. When you're the underdog in every fight, following rules that favor the strong is how you lose." The young human gestured broadly at the assembled alien cadets. "Everyone in this room comes from a species that has some kind of natural advantage. Speed, strength, armor, special senses, whatever. You can afford to fight honorably because honor doesn't require you to give up your advantages." Marcus's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "But humans? Our only advantage is that we think differently. We approach problems from angles that never occur to other species. And if that makes us unpredictable, if that makes us dangerous, if that makes other species uncomfortable," he shrugged, "that's their problem, not ours." Thokmar's rumbling voice cut through the tension. "You speak of making the enemy uncomfortable. What does that accomplish?" Marcus turned to face the massive Corvin cadet. "Everything, Cadet Thokmar. Because if your enemy doesn't understand how you think, they can't predict what you'll do. And if they can't predict what you'll do, they can't plan effectively against you." The human moved back to the holographic display, but this time he began manipulating the controls himself, highlighting different aspects of the outpost's design. "Take this scenario again. You said the hegemony used standard suppression tactics, concentrated fire, flanking maneuvers, overwhelming force at decisive points. Classic doctrine that works against conventional thinking." The display shifted as Marcus worked the controls, showing different attack vectors. But what if the defenders weren't thinking conventionally? What if instead of trying to hold fixed positions, they were mobile? What if instead of fighting where the enemy expected to find them, they weren't there at all? "Guerrilla tactics," Dr. Redhawk said softly from the faculty section, earning surprised looks from her colleagues. It was the first time she had spoken during the lecture. Marcus nodded gratefully in her direction. "Exactly, Dr. Redhawk. Humans perfected guerrilla warfare out of necessity. When you can't win stand-up fights, you don't have stand-up fights. You hit and run. You strike where the enemy is weak and disappear before they can respond. You make them afraid to leave their transports, afraid to sleep, afraid to trust their own equipment." Vexthai was studying the holographic display with new interest. "Such tactics require extensive preparation and detailed knowledge of the terrain." "Which humans would have," Marcus replied. "Because human doctrine assumes you're going to be outnumbered and outgunned, so you prepare accordingly. You don't just prepare to defend the outpost, You prepare to make the attackers regret ever hearing the name of this system. The young human's fingers danced over the hologram controls, and the display began showing a complex network of tunnels, hidden supply caches, and concealed weapon emplacements spreading far beyond the original outpost perimeter. You plant supply dumps in asteroid caves 50 kilometers away. You pre-position weapons and equipment where the enemy will never think to look. You map every tunnel, every cave, every possible hiding place within a 1,000-kilometer radius. And then, when the enemy comes expecting to take a nice, clean, fortified position, Marcus smiled that unsettling smile again. You turn their invasion into a nightmare that lasts for months. A Nagari cadet near the front raised his serpentine head. But such preparations would require enormous resources. The cost alone would be prohibitive. Not if you're human, Marcus replied. Because humans don't just prepare for one battle. They prepare for every battle they might ever have to fight. So human military doctrine is built around the assumption that someday, somewhere, you're going to have to defend something with insufficient resources against overwhelming odds. So you plan for that scenario from the beginning. Marcus manipulated the display again, showing supply routes and communication networks extending throughout the asteroid belt. Humans wouldn't just fortify Outpost Zeta 9. They'd fortify the entire system. Every asteroid, every moon, every piece of space debris would become part of an integrated defense network. That's madness, breathed a Veltar cadet. The sheer scale of such an undertaking is exactly what humans do, Marcus finished. Because humans understand something that other species seem to miss. Warfare isn't just about individual battles. It's about systems. It's about making your enemy fight not just your soldiers, but your entire civilization. Baxter had gone very still, his compound eyes fixed on the holographic display. The network Marcus had outlined was vast, complex, and deeply disturbing in its implications. Cadet Chen, you're describing a form of warfare that would turn every inhabited system into a potential battleground. Yes, sir, Marcus replied without hesitation. That's exactly what I'm describing. Because that's what human space would become if someone tried to invade it. Not a collection of targets to be conquered, but a unified defense network, where every planet, every station, every ship becomes part of the resistance. The lecture hall was completely silent now. Even the quiet background humming of the Veltar had stopped. The implications of what Marcus was describing were beginning to sink in among the alien cadets. But surely, Vexthai said slowly, such tactics would result in massive civilian casualties. Marcus's expression hardened. Yes, sir, they probably would. But that's not a bug in human military doctrine. It's a feature. The shocked gasps from around the hall were audible this time. Several alien cadets looked genuinely horrified. Marcus held up a hand. I'm not saying humans want civilian casualties. I'm saying humans understand that an enemy willing to attack civilian targets has already made a choice about the kind of war they want to fight. And if someone chooses to fight that kind of war against humanity, the young man's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They'll discover that humans are very, very good at it. Dr. Redhawk found herself gripping the arms of her chair. She had known Marcus was bright, but she was beginning to realize that she had seriously underestimated the depth of his understanding of human military philosophy. Vexthai's mandibles had stopped clicking entirely. Cadet Chen, are you suggesting that human military doctrine is based on total war? Not based on it, sir, Marcus replied quietly, built around the assumption of it. Humans learned a long time ago that there are really only two kinds of war, the kind where everyone follows the rules, and the kind where survival is the only rule that matters. The young human gestured at the complex defensive network still displayed in the hologram. Everything you see here is designed around the assumption that someone is trying to exterminate humanity. And if that's the kind of war they want, Marcus shrugged, humans will give them exactly what they asked for. Instructor Vexthai stared at the display for a long moment, then slowly turned back to face Marcus. Cadet Chen, I believe you mentioned that humans would cheat in this scenario. I confess I'm beginning to understand what you meant by that term. Marcus nodded. Humans don't fight by other species' rules because other species' rules weren't designed to account for human capabilities or human desperation. And what, Vexthai asked carefully, would you consider to be the most significant of those capabilities? Marcus thought for a moment, then smiled. This time there was something genuinely warm in the expression. Humans make friends, sir. Real friends. The kind who'll fight and die for each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. The instructor's compound eyes narrowed. You believe human pack bonding tendencies are a military advantage? No, sir, Marcus replied. I believe human pack bonding tendencies are the most dangerous military advantage any species has ever possessed. And with that statement hanging in the air like a challenge, Marcus sat back down, leaving the lecture hall in stunned silence and Instructor Vexthai staring at a holographic display that suddenly looked less like a tactical scenario and more like a glimpse into humanity's deepest, most carefully guarded secrets. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute before Instructor Vexthai found his voice again. His forearms gestured uncertainly at the holographic display, where Marcus's improvised defensive network still glowed in intricate detail. Cadet Chen, he said slowly, your assertions about human military capabilities are significant. However, theoretical discussions can only illuminate so much. Perhaps you would be willing to demonstrate these principles in a more practical setting. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had hoped his explanation would be enough to make his point, but he should have known better. The academy was built around practical application of military theory, and challenging an instructor's core assumptions was bound to have consequences. What did you have in mind, sir? Marcus asked, though he was fairly certain he already knew the answer. Vexthai's mandibles clicked in what might have been satisfaction. A simulation exercise. Tomorrow afternoon, in the Academy's main tactical training facility, you and your fellow human cadets will have the opportunity to demonstrate these unconventional approaches you've described. The instructor turned to address the broader classroom. All cadets will attend to observe this practical demonstration of human tactical doctrine. Consider it a learning opportunity to see alternative approaches to military problem solving. Marcus exchanged glances with Sarah O'Brien, who had gone pale again. The other human cadets were looking at him with expressions ranging from gratitude to absolute terror. He had essentially volunteered all of them for what was certain to be a very public examination of their capabilities. What will be the scenario parameters, sir? Dr. Redhawk asked from the faculty section. Vexthai turned his attention to her. I believe we should use the same basic situation that initiated this discussion. A defensive scenario where human forces are significantly outnumbered and outgunned, facing conventional attack by superior forces. His compound eyes fixed on Marcus again. After all, Cadet Chen seems confident that human doctrine excels under such circumstances. The instructor manipulated the holographic controls, and the display shifted to show a different installation. This one clearly within the Academy's training complex. Training Facility Alpha 7, a mock outpost with full defensive capabilities, surrounded by approximately 50 square kilometers of varied terrain including urban ruins, forest coverage, and underground tunnel networks. Marcus studied the hologram with growing unease. The facility was designed to test advanced tactical scenarios, with multiple levels of complexity and adaptive AI-controlled opposing forces. It was typically used for senior cadets in their final year, not second-year students like himself and his classmates. The human cadets will defend the installation, Vexthai continued. They will face a simulated attack by numerically superior forces using standard hegemony tactics. The exercise will continue until either the installation is captured or the attacking forces are neutralized. Thokmar raised one of her massive hands. What will be the force ratio, instructor? Given Cadet Chen's confidence in human adaptability, Vexthai replied, I believe a 10-to-1 disadvantage would be appropriate. 23 human defenders against 230 simulated attackers. Several alien cadets made sounds of shock or disbelief. Even by the Academy standards, those odds were extreme. Marcus felt his stomach drop, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. The simulation will be conducted under full combat conditions, the instructor added. Physical consequences for simulated damage, including temporary neural disruption for fatal injuries. Cadets who are killed during the exercise will be removed from the simulation for the remainder of the session. Sir, Sarah O'Brien spoke up for the first time, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. Will there be any special equipment or preparation time allowed? Vexthai's mandibles clicked dismissively. The human cadets will have access to standard academy training equipment and 12 hours to prepare their defense. No special allowances will be made. His tone made it clear that he expected this to be sufficient demonstration of human limitations. However, Dr. Redhawk interjected, I assume the human cadets will be allowed to operate according to their stated doctrine? No artificial constraints on tactical approaches? The instructor hesitated for just a moment. Within the bounds of Academy safety protocols and legal restrictions, Yes, though I confess I am curious to see what unconventional approaches Cadet Chen believes will prove effective against such odds. Marcus stood up again, aware that every eye in the hall was on him. He had started this confrontation, and now he was going to have to see it through to the end. "Thank you, sir," he said formally. "My fellow cadets and I accept your challenge." The word challenge rippled through the alien students with obvious significance. Among most galactic species, formal challenges were serious affairs with lasting consequences for the participants' reputations and standing. Vextai's compound eyes glittered. "Excellent, Cadet Chen. I look forward to observing your demonstration of human tactical superiority." As the lecture concluded and cadets began filing out of the hall, Marcus found himself surrounded by his fellow humans. Their expressions ranged from excited anticipation to barely controlled panic. "Marcus, what the hell were you thinking?" Jennifer Martinez hissed as they walked toward the exit. 10-to-1 odds in a full combat simulation. "We're going to get slaughtered." "Not if we do it right," Marcus replied, though he wasn't feeling nearly as confident as he tried to sound. "Do what right?" demanded Kyle Washington, one of the more experienced human cadets. "Everything you described in there was theoretical. None of us have actually trained in guerrilla warfare or asymmetric tactics." Sarah O'Brien put a hand on Marcus's arm. "He's right, Marcus. We're good soldiers, but we're still cadets. And we're going up against the Academy's most advanced tactical simulation systems." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face the group. They were in one of the Academy's smaller corridors now, away from the crowds of alien students, and he could speak more freely. "Look," he said quietly, "I know the odds look impossible, but that's exactly what I was trying to explain in there. Humans don't win by being stronger or faster or tougher. We win by changing the rules of the game." "And how exactly are we supposed to do that?" Jennifer asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What do we know about the Academy's simulation systems? They're adaptive AI programs designed to respond to conventional tactical approaches," replied David Kim, who had been studying computer systems engineering before joining the Academy. "They analyze defender positions and capabilities, then apply optimal force distribution and maneuver patterns." "Conventional approaches," Marcus repeated. "What happens if we don't use conventional approaches?" Kyle frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we don't try to defend the outpost at all? What if we let them have it?" The group stared at him in confusion. "Marcus," Sarah said slowly, "the objective is to defend the installation. If we let them take it, we lose." "Do we?" Marcus asked. "Let me ask you something. What's the actual victory condition for the exercise?" David consulted his notes from the lecture. "Either the installation is captured, or the attacking forces are neutralized." "Exactly," Marcus said, his eyes lighting up. "We don't have to hold the base. We just have to neutralize the attackers. And which do you think is easier? Fighting 230 enemies from fixed defensive positions, or hunting them down when they're not expecting resistance?" The group was silent for a moment, as the implications sank in. "You want us to abandon the outpost and go guerrilla?" Kyle said finally. "I want us to fight like humans," Marcus corrected. "The simulation AI is programmed to expect conventional defensive tactics, fixed positions, overlapping fields of fire, fighting withdrawals to secondary positions. Standard doctrine for species that have the physical advantages to make such tactics work." Marcus gestured toward the training facility schematics they had seen in the lecture hall. "But we're not Corvin or Zephyrians or any other species represented at this academy. We're humans. And humans fight dirty. Even if we could pull off some kind of unconventional strategy," Jennifer said skeptically, "we only have 12 hours to prepare. The other species train for years to perfect their tactical approaches, which is another advantage for us," Marcus replied. "They spend years training to perfect tactics that work for their species. We've got 12 hours to come up with something completely outside their experience." Sarah was looking thoughtful. "You really think we can do this?" Marcus looked around at his fellow humans, 23 young men and women who had somehow earned their way into the most prestigious military academy in known space. They weren't the strongest or fastest or most naturally gifted warriors in their class, but they were smart, adaptable, and most importantly, they were human. "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that tomorrow afternoon is going to be very educational for everyone involved." Dr. Redhawk had been walking slowly behind a group of human cadets, listening to their conversation with interest. As they reached the intersection where their paths would diverge, she stepped forward. "Cadet Chen," she said quietly. The group turned to look at her, and Marcus stepped slightly forward. "Yes, ma'am? I'll be in my office this evening if you and your classmates would like to discuss historical precedents for the kind of tactical approaches you mentioned in class today." Marcus studied her face carefully. Dr. Redhawk was one of the Academy's most respected instructors, but she was also human, and there was something in her expression that suggested she understood exactly what he was planning. "Thank you, ma'am," he said formally. "I think we would find such a discussion very educational." Dr. Redhawk nodded once, then walked away without another word. The human cadets watched her go, then looked back at Marcus. "Well," Sarah said finally, "I guess we'd better start planning." "Yeah," Marcus agreed, his mind already racing through possibilities. "We've got a lot of work to do." As the group headed toward their dormitory, none of them noticed the small crowd of alien cadets who had been listening from around the corner. Thokmar, the massive Korvan who had participated in the classroom discussion, stood with several of her classmates, their expressions troubled. "Do you think they can actually do it?" asked one of the Zephyrian cadets. Thokmar was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the conversation she had just overheard. There had been something in the way the humans spoke, a casual confidence about tactics and strategies that seemed completely alien to her own understanding of warfare. "I don't know," she admitted finally, "but I'm beginning to think we may have seriously underestimated them." The Zephyrian cadet's wings rustled nervously. Instructor Vexthai seems confident that this exercise will prove human limitations. Instructor Vexthai, Thokmar said slowly, may be about to learn something he didn't expect. As the alien cadets dispersed to their own preparations for the following day's demonstration, none of them could shake the feeling that they were about to witness something unprecedented in the Academy's history. The humans had accepted an impossible challenge with the kind of calm confidence that suggested they knew something their instructors didn't. The only question was whether that confidence was justified, or whether tomorrow would simply be a painful demonstration of the gap between human aspirations and human capabilities. In either case, it was going to be the most watched training exercise in recent Academy history. The Academy's main tactical training facility hummed with activity as the afternoon demonstration began. Observation galleries surrounding the massive arena were packed with cadets, instructors, and senior staff from across the Academy. Word of the human cadets' challenge to Instructor Vexthai's assessment had spread quickly through the Academy's social networks, and nobody wanted to miss what promised to be either a spectacular vindication of human potential or an equally spectacular demonstration of human overconfidence. Admiral Korefva, the Academy's Zephyrian commandant, stood in the primary observation deck alongside the senior faculty. Her wing membranes twitched with nervous energy as she watched the final preparations below. "Are you certain this exercise is appropriate, Instructor Vexthai?" she asked. "The odds you've established are extreme even for advanced cadets." Vexthai's compound eyes remained fixed on the tactical display showing the training area. "The human cadets requested the opportunity to demonstrate their species' tactical capabilities, Admiral. I am merely providing them with an appropriate scenario." Redhawk stood quietly at the back of the faculty observation area, her expression unreadable. She had spent 4 hours the previous evening in her office with the human cadets, ostensibly discussing historical military campaigns. What they had actually discussed was far more specific and far more dangerous. On the arena floor, the 23 human cadets stood in a loose formation near the mock outpost that would serve as their theoretical defensive position. The installation was an impressive piece of engineering, a multi-level fortress with automated defense systems, underground bunkers, and strategic choke points designed to channel attacking forces into kill zones. Marcus Chen stood at the front of the human group, wearing standard Academy training armor and carrying a regulation pulse rifle. Around him, his classmates looked nervous but determined. They had spent most of the night planning, and the results of their preparation were about to be tested against one of the most sophisticated military simulation systems in known space. "Attention all participants," came the voice of the exercise controller over the facility's communication system. "The exercise will commence in 60 seconds. Defending forces, you may take your initial positions. Attacking forces will begin their approach from the northern perimeter in 1 minute." Marcus looked back at his team. "Everyone remember the plan?" "Hard to forget something this crazy," muttered Kyle Washington, but he was smiling as he said it. Sarah O'Brien checked her equipment one final time. Signal protocols are established. Supply caches are positioned. Extraction routes are marked. "Good," Marcus said. Remember, this isn't about proving we're the best soldiers in the academy.
It's about proving that humans think differently. So let's think differently.
The exercise controller's voice echoed across the arena again. Exercise commences in 10 seconds. All participants, prepare for engagement. In the observation galleries, hundreds of pairs of alien eyes watched the human cadets with intense curiosity. Most expected to see them take positions within the fortress, establishing overlapping fields of fire and preparing for a conventional siege defense. Instead, as the exercise timer reached 0, the humans did something unprecedented in Academy history. They scattered. Within 30 seconds of the exercise beginning, the 23 human cadets had disappeared into the surrounding terrain, leaving the fortress completely unmanned. Observation galleries erupted in confused murmur as instructors and students tried to understand what they were witnessing. "Are they abandoning their position?" asked Cadet Thopmar, her massive frame leaning forward to get a better view. Admiral Karethva turned sharply toward Vexvi. "Instructor, did you explain the exercise parameters correctly to the human cadets?" "I assured them that the objective was to defend the installation," Vexvi replied, though he sounded less certain than he had earlier. "Perhaps they misunderstood." "No," Dr. Redhawk interrupted quietly. "They understood perfectly. The simulated attacking force, 230 AI-controlled combat units representing standard hegemony forces, approached the fortress from multiple directions. Their programming was sophisticated, designed to respond to defender positions and adapt tactics accordingly. But as they reached the outer perimeter of the installation, they encountered something their programmers had never anticipated: nothing. The fortress was empty. No defenders in the towers, no weapons fire from the prepared positions, no signs of organized resistance. The AI systems paused, running rapid analysis routines to determine if this was some kind of trap or tactical deception. Meanwhile, scattered throughout the 50 square kilometers of training area, the human cadets had already begun implementing their strategy. Marcus Chen lay prone in a concealed position nearly 2 kilometers from the fortress, watching through his rifle's scope as the simulated enemy forces cautiously advanced on the empty installation. "Phase 1 complete," he whispered into his communication unit. "All units, confirm your positions." One by one, his classmates reported in. They were spread across the training area in carefully chosen locations, some in the ruins of the mock urban environment, others in the artificial forest, still more in the tunnel networks that honeycombed the underground sections. None of them were anywhere near the fortress they were supposed to be defending. "Contact!" came Sarah O'Brien's voice over the comm. She was positioned in the ruins of a mock civilian structure nearly 3 kilometers south of the main installation. "Enemy reconnaissance units are conducting systematic sweeps. They seem confused by our absence." Marcus smiled grimly. The AI systems were programmed to expect defenders to behave rationally, according to conventional military doctrine. Finding an abandoned fortress was causing them to run additional analysis protocols, trying to determine what kind of trap they might be walking into. "Let them take the base," Marcus instructed. "Remember, our objective isn't to hold ground, it's to neutralize the attacking force." In the observation galleries, the confusion was palpable. Instructor Vexthai manipulated the display controls to show the positions of both the simulated attackers and the human defenders. The result was bewildering. While the enemy forces were concentrated around the fortress, trying to understand why it was undefended, the humans were scattered across the entire training area with no apparent coordination. "This is madness," muttered an artillery instructor. "They've abandoned any hope of mutual support. They'll be defeated in detail." Admiral Korethva studied the tactical display with growing concern. "Redhawk, can you explain what your species cadets are attempting to accomplish?" Dr. Redhawk's expression remained carefully neutral. "I believe they're demonstrating alternative approaches to defensive operations, Admiral. By abandoning their defensive position, by redefining what defensive means," Dr. Redhawk replied cryptically. On the arena floor, the simulated enemy forces had completed their occupation of the fortress. The AI systems registered this as a significant tactical victory. The primary objective had been secured with 0 casualties and minimal expenditure of resources. But their programming also indicated that the exercise should continue until all defending forces were neutralized. The problem was, the AI couldn't figure out where the defending forces were or what they were trying to accomplish. Marcus watched through his scope as enemy units began expanding their perimeter around the captured fortress. This was standard doctrine: secure the primary objective, then establish a defensive perimeter to prevent counterattack. The AI was following its programming perfectly, which was exactly what Marcus had been counting on. Phase 2, he announced into his comm unit. Initiate harassment protocols. What happened next would be analyzed and reanalyzed by military theorists for years to come. The first enemy unit to go down was a reconnaissance patrol moving through the mock urban ruins. Jennifer Martinez, positioned in the upper floor of a damaged building, waited until the patrol was directly below her, then dropped a training grenade into their midst before immediately evacuating through a pre-planned escape route. By the time the simulated explosion had killed the entire patrol, she was already 200 meters away and moving toward her next position. The second attack came from Kyle Washington, who had positioned himself in the tunnel networks beneath the forest area. Using improvised explosives, standard training materials reconfigured according to techniques Dr. Redhawk had theoretically discussed the previous evening. He collapsed a section of tunnel just as an enemy patrol was passing overhead. The casualties included not just the patrol itself, but the equipment and supplies they were carrying. Within 20 minutes, the human cadets had eliminated 37 enemy units without losing a single person. More importantly, they had done it in ways that the AI systems were struggling to predict or counter. How are they coordinating these attacks? Demanded Vexthai, staring at the tactical display in disbelief. They're operating independently across the entire training area, yet their timing is perfect. Redhawk allowed herself a small smile. Human military doctrine places great emphasis on individual initiative within an overall strategic framework. Each cadet understands the general plan and is authorized to implement it as local conditions permit. But Vexthai struggled for words. That's completely contrary to effective command and control principles. For most species, Dr. Redhawk agreed. Humans tend to approach military organization differently. On the arena floor, the AI systems were beginning to adapt. Unable to predict where the next attack would come from, they began deploying forces in a more defensive posture, establishing overlapping patrol routes and maintaining constant communication with all units. This played directly into the humans' hands. Marcus had anticipated this response. The AI was designed to learn and adapt, which meant it would eventually modify its tactics to account for unconventional threats, but adaptation took time and resources. And every minute the enemy spent trying to figure out what the humans were doing was a minute the humans could use to whittle down their numbers. Phase 3, Marcus announced, psychological operations. What followed was unlike anything ever seen in an academy training exercise. The human cadets began using the environment itself as a weapon, creating the impression of a much larger force than they actually represented. Sarah O'Brien rigged several abandoned vehicles in the urban ruins to explode in sequence, creating the illusion of a coordinated artillery barrage. David Kim used his engineering skills to reprogram several of the training area's holographic projectors, creating false images of human forces in locations where none actually existed. Others left false evidence of supply caches and equipment stockpiles, forcing the AI to divert resources to investigate phantom threats. The psychological effect on the observing cadets was profound, even though they knew this was a simulation. Even though they could see the tactical displays showing the true positions of all forces, the sheer audacity of the human approach was unsettling. They're not just fighting the enemy forces, observed Tokmar to her fellow cadets. They're fighting the enemy's ability to understand what's happening. The massive Corvin was right. The AI systems, for all their sophistication, were struggling to develop effective countermeasures against opponents whose behavior fell so far outside conventional parameters. Every time the system adapted to one pattern of human behavior, the humans shifted to a completely different approach. By the 90-minute mark of the exercise, the simulated enemy force had been reduced to fewer than 150 units, despite controlling the fortress and maintaining superior firepower. More critically, their effectiveness was degrading rapidly as uncertainty and confusion spread through their ranks. The AI systems were experiencing something analogous to what military historians called fog of war, the breakdown of information and decision-making that occurs when battlefield conditions exceed an army's ability to process and respond to threats. This is unprecedented, Admiral Karethva said quietly, studying the tactical displays. In 40 years of academy exercises, I have never seen attacking forces become this disorganized while maintaining material superiority. Vexthai's mandibles were clicking rapidly. They're not winning through superior tactics or equipment. They're winning through confusion and misdirection. No, Dr. Redhawk corrected gently. They're winning because they understand something that our simulation systems don't, which is that warfare isn't really about force-on-force confrontation. It's about making your enemy fight the battle you want to fight instead of the battle they want to fight. On the arena floor, Marcus was preparing for the final phase of the operation. The enemy forces were confused, depleted, and demoralized. Their command structure was breaking down as local units tried to respond to threats they couldn't predict or understand. It was time to end the exercise. "All units," he announced into his comm. Phase 4, General Engagement. For the first time since the exercise began, all 23 human cadets began moving toward the fortress simultaneously. But they weren't advancing in neat formations or following conventional assault patterns. Instead, they approached from every direction at once, using the confusion they had created to mask their movements. The final assault was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. The humans attacked not as a single force, but as 23 independent threats, each exploiting different weaknesses in the enemy's defensive posture. The AI systems, already struggling to track and predict human movement, simply couldn't process and respond to so many simultaneous, unpredictable threats. The exercise ended 18 minutes later with the complete neutralization of all enemy forces. The observation galleries fell into stunned silence as the final scores appeared on the tactical displays. Enemy forces eliminated, 230. Human casualties, 0. It took several long seconds before anyone found their voice. "How?" Baxthai whispered, staring at the displays as if they might change if he looked at them long enough. Marcus Chen stood in the center of the arena, surrounded by his fellow human cadets, and looked up toward the observation galleries. His voice carried clearly through the facility's acoustic systems as he answered the instructor's question. "We fought like humans, sir. The aftermath of the exercise was unlike anything in the Academy's history. As news of the impossible victory spread through the corridors and communication networks, crowds began gathering wherever human cadets could be found. Some wanted explanations, others wanted to offer congratulations, and more than a few seemed to be studying the humans with the kind of intense curiosity usually reserved for dangerous and unpredictable phenomena. In the main conference room of the Academy's command center, an emergency faculty meeting had been called. Admiral Cora Thar sat at the head of the table, her wing membranes twitching with nervous energy as she studied the detailed reports from the training exercise. Around her, the Academy's senior instructors represented a cross-section of galactic military expertise, and every one of them looked deeply unsettled. "The analysis is conclusive," reported Dr. Velmash, the Academy's chief of tactical studies, his crystalline form chiming softly as he spoke. "The human cadets achieved a complete tactical victory against odds that our simulation systems rated as insurmountable." "How insurmountable?" asked Admiral Koretha. "According to our modeling protocols, the probability of successful defense under the established parameters was approximately 0.03%, effectively impossible." Instructor Vexthai shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His usually immaculate composure had been thoroughly shattered by the afternoon's events. The simulation systems must have malfunctioned. "There's no other explanation. The systems were checked 3 times, Dr. Velmash replied. All components functioned perfectly. The AI responded according to its programming and adapted its tactics as designed. The humans simply exceeded all predictive models. Admiral Korthar turned her attention to Dr. Redhawk, who had remained quietly thoughtful throughout the discussion. "Dr. Redhawk, as our specialist in human military history, perhaps you can offer some insight into what we witnessed today." Dr. Redhawk stood and moved to the holographic projector at the center of the table. With a few gestures, she called up the tactical replay of the exercise, showing the movements of both forces throughout the engagement. "What you witnessed today," she said carefully, "was not an anomaly or a system malfunction. It was human military doctrine operating exactly as designed." "Designed for what?" Vexthai demanded. "Chaos? Abandoning defensive positions? Completely ignoring established tactical principles?" "Designed for survival," Dr. Redhawk replied quietly. The room fell silent at her tone. "You have to understand something about human military evolution. Unlike most species in this room, humans didn't develop their combat doctrines from positions of strength." She manipulated the hologram, highlighting different aspects of the human cadets' movements during the exercise. Every other species represented at this academy evolved as apex predators or developed technological advantages that gave them dominance over their environments. Your military traditions are built around concepts like honor, territorial control, and direct confrontation because those approaches worked for your ancestors. Red Hawk paused, studying the faces around the table. Humans evolved as prey animals on a world where everything was bigger, stronger, faster, and more dangerous than they were. Human military doctrine doesn't come from a tradition of strength. It comes from a tradition of absolute desperation. Admiral Karethva leaned forward. Explain. For most of human evolutionary history, Dr. Red Hawk continued, survival meant outthinking predators that could kill them with ease. Humans learned to use tools not because they were particularly clever, but because they were too weak to survive without them. They learned to cooperate not because they were naturally social, but because isolated humans died quickly. The holographic display shifted to show human historical conflicts. This carried over into human warfare. When humans fight other humans, they're not fighting for territory or resources or honor. They're fighting for the survival of their group, their families, their entire way of life. And when you're fighting for survival against an enemy that outclasses you in every physical category, you don't fight fair. You can't afford to. Baxtey's mandibles clicked uncertainly. You're suggesting that what we saw today represents normal human military behavior? I'm suggesting, Dr. Red Hawk said, that what you saw today was humans being polite. The silence that followed was so complete that the room's ventilation systems seemed unnaturally loud. Polite? Whispered Dr. Garth Velmash. Red Hawk nodded grimly. The human cadets were operating under Academy rules and safety protocols. They couldn't use actual explosives, couldn't inflict real casualties, couldn't employ psychological warfare techniques that might cause lasting trauma to their opponents. What you saw was human military doctrine, with most of its teeth removed. She manipulated the hologram again, showing detailed analyses of specific engagements from the exercise. Even operating under these constraints, they achieved perfect tactical efficiency. 0 casualties while completely destroying an enemy force 40 times their size. Do you understand what that implies about human capabilities when those constraints are removed? Admiral Karethva found her voice first. Dr. Red Hawk, are you suggesting that humanity represents some kind of threat to galactic security? No, Admiral, Doctor. Red Hawk replied firmly. I'm suggesting that humanity represents the most valuable potential ally any galactic civilization could hope for. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Several instructors began speaking at once until Admiral Karethva called for order. Explain that statement, Doctor. Doctor, Red Hawk gestured toward the tactical display one more time. Think about what you witnessed today from a strategic perspective. A small force defeated a much larger enemy through superior planning, coordination, and adaptability. They achieved their objectives with minimal resource expenditure and 0 losses. From any measure that matters, this was a perfect military operation. But their methods, Vexthai began. Their methods work, Dr. Red Hawk interrupted. That's what makes them valuable. Human military doctrine isn't constrained by traditions or biological limitations. It's purely results-oriented. Humans will use whatever tactics, whatever strategies, whatever methods are necessary to protect the things they care about. She paused, looking around the room. Every species at this academy has natural advantages that make certain types of warfare effective for them. But humans? Humans can learn to fight like anyone. And more importantly, they can learn to fight like no one else. Admiral Karethva was quiet for a long moment. Dr. Red Hawk, what you're describing sounds like a species that could be extremely dangerous to work with. Or dangerous to work against, Dr. Red Hawk replied. Which brings me to the most important point about human military doctrine. Something that Cadet Chen tried to explain yesterday, but that I don't think anyone fully understood. She called up a new display, showing communication patterns and coordination networks from the exercise. Look at how the human cadets operated. 23 individuals, scattered across 50 square kilometers, with no centralized command structure and minimal communication. Yet they functioned as a single, coordinated entity. The display highlighted the timing and positioning of various attacks throughout the exercise. Despite being spread across the entire training area, the humans had somehow maintained perfect coordination. This is the real secret of human military effectiveness, Dr. Brahm, Red Hawk continued. It's not their adaptability or their creativity or their willingness to break rules. It's their ability to function as a unified organism while maintaining individual initiative. Dr. Kamatara. Velnash studied the coordination patterns with obvious fascination. How is such coordination possible without centralized command? Because humans don't just work together, Dr. Paz, Red Hawk explained. They bond. They form emotional connections that transcend individual self-interest. When humans say they're fighting for their brothers and sisters in arms, they mean it literally. They will sacrifice themselves for people they met 3 months ago because those people have become family. She highlighted specific moments from the exercise where individual humans had taken risks to support teammates they couldn't even see. This isn't just military cooperation. It's something much deeper and much more dangerous from an enemy's perspective. Admiral Karethva was beginning to understand. You're saying that attacking humans means attacking not just soldiers, but families. Exactly. And families fight differently than armies. Armies have objectives, rules of engagement, acceptable loss ratios. Families have one objective: protect the family. Everything else is secondary. The implications were beginning to sink in around the table. They looked particularly troubled. Doctor, Red Hawk, if human military doctrine is as effective as this exercise suggests, why wasn't this identified during their admission evaluation? Dr. Red Hawk smiled, but there was no humor in it. Because the admission evaluation was designed to test individual combat capabilities and conventional tactical knowledge, no one thought to test for the ability to turn an impossible situation into a perfect victory through sheer audacity. She gestured toward the door. Right now, there are 23 human cadets who just proved that everything we thought we knew about military limitations was wrong. They're probably in their dormitory, analyzing their performance and figuring out how to do it better next time. Better? Dr. Velnash chimed in alarm. Humans always assume they can do better. Dr. Red Hawk replied. It's a species-wide psychological trait. They are literally incapable of accepting that they've reached their limits. The room fell silent again as the faculty absorbed this information. Finally, Admiral Karethva spoke. Dr. Red Hawk, in your professional opinion, what are the implications of today's demonstration for the Academy and for galactic defense generally? Dr. Red Hawk was quiet for several seconds, choosing her words carefully. Admiral, I believe we need to fundamentally reassess our understanding of human military potential. More than that, I think we need to consider whether our current training programs are adequate for preparing human cadets to reach their actual capabilities. What do you mean? I mean that if 23 second-year cadets with 12 hours of preparation can achieve these results, what might properly trained and equipped human forces be capable of? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, some of the galaxy's most experienced military minds contemplated the implications of a species that treated impossible odds as merely inconvenient obstacles. There's something else, Dr. Red Hawk added quietly. Something Cadet Chen mentioned but I don't think anyone fully processed. What? He said that humans make friends, real friends, the kind who'll fight and die for each other not because they have to, but because they choose to. She looked around the table. Ladies and gentlemen, humanity has been part of galactic civilization for less than 50 years. In that time, they've formed genuine emotional bonds with members of dozens of species. The implications were staggering. Admiral Karethva spoke them aloud. You're suggesting that human pack bonding could extend beyond their own species. I'm suggesting, Dr. Red Hawk replied, that humanity might be capable of forming the kind of interspecies military alliances that could change the balance of power in this galaxy. She called up one final display, a map of known space showing the territories of various hostile powers that threatened galactic civilization, the Hegemony, the Void Syndicate, the Crimson Fleet. All of these organizations rely on the fact that galactic species have trouble working together effectively. Different biologies, different psychologies, different tactical doctrines. But humans? Humans adapt. They learn. They form emotional bonds that transcend species barriers. And when humans bond with someone, that someone becomes family. Dr. Red Hawk's voice carried a note of certainty that was almost frightening. A human military alliance wouldn't just be a collection of different species fighting together. It would be a family fighting to protect each other. The silence stretched until Vexthai finally spoke. Dr. Red Hawk, you're describing a fundamental shift in how we understand human military capabilities. No, Instructor Vexthai, Dr. Red Hawk replied. I'm describing a fundamental shift in how we understand galactic military capabilities. Because humanity isn't just another species with unique tactical advantages. She gestured toward the tactical display one last time. where the impossible victory was still recorded in precise detail. Humanity is a force multiplier for everyone they choose to fight alongside. And after today, I suspect a lot of species are going to be very interested in earning that choice. Admiral Korithvar stood. Her decision made. Red Hawk, I'm authorizing you to develop a new curriculum specifically designed for human cadets. I want to know what they're truly capable of when they're not operating under artificial constraints. Yes, Admiral. And Dr. Red Hawk, I want you to consider developing joint training programs as well. If humans can amplify the capabilities of allied forces the way you suggest, she paused, contemplating the possibilities. The entire nature of galactic defense might be about to change. As the faculty meeting concluded and the instructors dispersed to their various duties, none of them could shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something historically significant. The Academy had been built around the assumption that each species brought unique strengths and limitations to warfare. But humanity had just demonstrated that their greatest strength might be the ability to transcend limitations entirely, their own and everyone else's. In the human dormitory, Marcus Chen sat with his fellow cadets, reviewing recordings of their exercise performance. They were already planning improvements, identifying weaknesses, discussing how they could do better next time. It never occurred to any of them that what they had accomplished was supposed to be impossible. After all, they were human. Impossible was just another problem to solve.